hey, did I feel like I had a sense of purpose today or not? Um, and I think that's a powerful question that we don't always ask ourselves, but it's a pretty small, well, it's a big question, but you can do it on a scale of 1 to 5. And it's just, every day adding those little things that you do up to say, hey, did I hit that target or how far off was I?
Welcome to the Mental Training Lab. I'm Pete Kadushin, your host, and my job is to have fun conversations that leave you with actionable tools, little experiments that will help you improve your mindset and mental skills so that you can do the things you love at a higher level. Today in the lab, we've got Ali Levy. Ali is the Director of Product at O2X and a mental performance specialist. In her role at O2X, Ali works with leading researchers and educators around the country to create tailored, integrated programming designed to meet the unique demands facing tactical athletes and elite organizations. She also holds an MED in counseling and sports psychology from Boston University. In her first career, Ali skied as a member of the U.S. Freestyle Ski Team, where she competed at the World Cup level and was crowned two-time North American Cup Grand Prix champion. As if that wasn't impressive enough, she's also co-led a 1,100-mile self-supported bike ride from Seattle to San Francisco, and most recently trained for and finished her second 50-mile ultramarathon. In this episode, we dive into the process of systematic reflection, we break down the momentum that you can build from stacking up little wins, and we look at why living in alignment is just so dang powerful. But you know what? Enough from me. Let's get to the show. Ali, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm really excited to have you here at the Mental Training Lab.
It's great to be here. I'm super excited. So it's always fun to talk shop.
Oh, we are going to talk shop. We're going to have what I hope is a really fun, geeky conversation. And so I'd love to just dive right in. And let's start with thinking about mental skills training. And I'm really curious because we've had this conversation several times around how to measure and understand what success looks like from a mental training or a mental skills training standpoint. And so I'm wondering, with the work that you've done around tactical athletes, what do folks generally miss when they think about mental skills training? What are they paying attention to? And if you could shift that, what would you want them to be keeping score around?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was actually thinking about that this morning during a workout. It's like, oh, I've been doing one type of workout for so long and tried a different type of workout, and then my performance stayed the same. And I was like, oh, this is working. Whatever I've been doing is working. And I think sometimes with mental skills, we overcomplicate kind of measuring success, and we're looking for some kind of grand impact or grand number, or wake up and just be like fully conscious of everything around us and feel totally present after we've been practicing mindfulness or breathing for some number of times. And I think a lot of what we do in working with tactical athletes is figuring out kind of the everyday successes, and what is it that maybe it was a conversation or a stressful situation you've been in 100 times that for whatever reason today felt a little calmer, or you were able to take more of a pause before responding to something that normally would cause a lot of stress. So I think it's finding those little everyday moments that gradually over time get easier and easier. To be honest, I don't know that there's like a great measurement out there. So I'd be curious your thoughts on kind of finding that's hard to conceptualize for someone who's new to mental performance. Be like, oh yeah, your conversations are just going to get easier, or you're going to handle a stress a little bit better. But kind of your thoughts on like how to help people see that without tracking it in a journal or anything daily.
I think that one of the early habits I try and instill in the clients that I work with is some form of reflection, systematic reflection around this exact thing. So designing your own scorecard and then actually keeping score at the end of every day, but being really purposeful about what you put on there.
Yeah.
I think that your point, though, is we often are looking for the big win and don't notice that the little wins are actually stacking up into the big wins. And we also generally are looking in a very concrete way. We're saying, okay, well, if I'm breathing different, this should change. And so it might be perceived exertion in the middle of a PT test or something of that nature. And the truth is, and what you just highlighted, is that the benefits show up in really interesting ways. So I practice mindfulness, and it might not be sitting on a cushion on the top of a mountain with swirling wind and like the whole thing, right? It might just be paying attention while you're doing the dishes, to
Yeah.
doing the dishes. And the purpose is not to get better at doing the dishes, right? You don't need to optimize your performance there, right? But like you said, the conversation that you have with a significant other or a colleague, where you have that shining moment where you're suddenly present. And it seems like it happened out of nowhere, but it didn't happen by accident, right? You trained that to happen. And now that conversation takes a subtle or maybe a profound shift. And I think we miss that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the other thing that's interesting too is even if you have someone who's been practicing, whether it's breathing or some type of mindfulness or any mental performance skill for a long time, helping them switch skills, because I think sometimes you hit a plateau, just like physical training. If you're doing the same lifts, the same distance of running every time, you might be performing pretty well, but helping people kind of transition into new skills. I was just having a conversation with a hockey athlete who has been using the same style of breathing for a long time, and all of a sudden we're kind of talking through some different things at one of our events, and it's like, oh well, try low and slow breathing, or try a different form of breathing and see what that does. And then all of a sudden, the next day you see a major impact, and then over time you kind of that like light bulb moment fades away a little bit, and it's okay, how do you like reignite that, and helping people realize that just because you're doing one mental performance skill doesn't mean you never have to use another one or learn another one or practice another one. There's always ways to kind of continue to make that transition from a plateau moment to build it up, and you never hit the top. There's always something to continue to do and get better at.
I love the tie-in here to physical training, because I often think that we miss an opportunity. A lot of people are familiar with what it's like to train physically, whether it's endurance or strength or performance specific training. And a lot of the principles that govern physical training and muscles absolutely govern the muscles in between your ears. And so that idea of finding a way to continually challenge the system. So if we're thinking about your attention control, right, to find ways to vary the environment once you feel comfortable controlling your attention in a certain environment, to put proverbial weight on the bar so that you're always pushing that muscle a little bit further.
Yeah.
And the other point that you brought up that I think is really useful is that it can be really easy to get prescriptive. And it's the same thing with physical training, right? I saw a celebrity on Instagram do this workout, so I'm doing that workout, and it's the only workout I'm going to do. And realizing that instead of approaching it that way, it's really about building the intelligence, that physical intelligence through training. And then obviously, if we're thinking about the mental skills, it's building the intelligence and then the fitness to deploy a skill in complicated, uncertain environments. And so rather than saying the only way to breathe is 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out, to really empower people to think, well, let me try 4 and 6, and let me try through the nose and then out the nose, and let me try through the nose and then out the mouth. And if I can explore all these different areas and places, then I've built a skill that's robust and it's resilient, as opposed to one technique and one trick, and it only works in this very specific instance. And so, helping that hockey athlete shift out of a more rigid approach to training, I think pays tons and tons of benefits down the road.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think right now we live in a world that's like wants quick fixes. And so getting people to try all those different things is a challenge. I think that's whether you're talking strength and conditioning, or they want a meal plan for nutrition, or people just want to know, like, tell me what to do and how to breathe, and I'll do it. And they want that kind of quick fix. And I think with mental performance in particular, I think everything's the same in that way, that there's no real, you have to figure it out for yourself, and everyone's going to operate a little differently. And that's, to your point about the Instagram influencers, that's it's a hard thing for people to grasp, because everyone's just looking for, well, all right, who's the person that I look up to the most in their performance? What do they do? I'm going to do that, without kind of personalizing it and saying, well, maybe that doesn't work for me, but this does. And trying to get people out of their comfort zone to try different things, we live in a challenging time for that.
Nobody wants to hear that it's one size fits one.
Exactly.
But to play the other end of this, quick wins are important, right? Especially quick big wins, because that might be the thing that hooks that individual into the idea that breathing different, paying attention different, looking at the words that you're saying to yourself in your mind and controlling those in some way or shaping those in some way could be meaningful. And so what have you seen as the big wins or the quick wins with the populations that you work with, right? First responders, across the board, those tactical athletes.
Yeah, I think number one, first and foremost, is always breathing. That's the one that I see tactical athletes kind of grab onto the most, and usually in my experience and in what I've heard, the success comes from when they're trying to go to bed. So you'll teach them a breathing skill, and then they'll come back into a workshop the next day and say, "Whoa, like I tried low and slow breathing right before I went to bed, and I was out cold for the first time. I slept well for the first time in however many months." And I think nature of the population we work with as first responders, a lot of them are on shift work or not getting great sleep for a variety of different reasons, and so that's a really big win to be able to show them one very, very small skill. And I think that's the other key is that it has to be a big win, but it has to be a little change. And I think that's, what we talk a lot about, and this as well, as like 1% changes is what's like the smallest incremental change you can make that's going to have the biggest return. And so breathing, I think, it's one, something we all have to do every day, all the time. So it's not teaching them something brand new. It's something that obviously you have to do to live. And so that's a really easy win to say, just do something you're already doing in a slightly different way. And that tends to really resonate with people. And I think because it has such a big impact on energy and on sleep, that's sort of a light bulb moment for most tactical athletes I've seen. And also kind of the stress situations that they're going into. There's always room to take a deep breath. And there's always ways to get that involved in their daily life. Whereas teaching something like visualization or something like thought stopping or something a little bit more of like a brand new skill is going to take more time for them to figure out different ways to put it into their lives and different ways to really see the impact of it.
There's so much juicy stuff just packed in that response. Well, first, I love that you're on brand. Right, the very first question I asked, you were already on the 1% better by saying, here's the little ways that you're getting better each day and drawing my attention to it, the listener's attention to it. And it's something that we usually overlook. And I think a lot of the power of the programming that you put together and share with folks who go through these workshops is around shifting perspective towards, if I get 1% better today, and I do that every day, that's a meaningful change, right? That's not throwaway difference. I also love the idea that you sleep. I mean, I think sleep is king or queen or whatever is higher than that, right? If you don't sleep well, everything else is worse. If you sleep well, everything else is better. And so finding a way to go right at the heart of that and share a skill that we all do, right? Everybody's breathing. If you're not, see your doctor.
You got a problem.
That's right. Everybody's doing it, but most of us are not doing it on purpose for a purpose. And so just putting people's hands on the steering wheel for that first time and saying like, oh, you can actually drive your nervous system, right? You have choice. That's like mind blowing for folks. And it's funny because breathing isn't particularly sexy, but getting better sleep, that is.
Yeah.
At least in my world.
Yeah. I think you hit on something there too with like talking through breathing, and something that we see works really well with people. I think sort of missing link even to the measuring success question too is really tying the skills into how it physiologically impacts you. I think you hit on that with the nervous system. It's like knowing that breathing is pretty much the only autonomic thing that you can actually take control of and directly impact your response to stress. I think is, for me, that's amazingly mind blowing and very cool. And I think that's also why it resonates really well with the groups we work with, because there's science behind it. It's not, it's not coming out of left field. It's not something totally they've never heard of. It's driven by science. I think that's why it probably resonates really well with who we work with too.
And I've found in working with those populations, but across the board, that being able to point to the very concrete connection between what happens in between your ears, not on the brain level, but in the mind, and then what's happening in your body, suddenly it goes from like, oh, we're just thinking about feelings, we're just talking about stuff, to this is going to have a demonstrated effect on me and my body, my heart rate, my muscle tension, all of that. Like now that it's concrete, I think I'm a little bit more invested.
Yeah.
And so that's been a really important entry point for me as I've evolved, because early on when you're like, well, how does that make you feel? People are like, man, I'm not here for therapy. I just want to be able to dunk a basketball better.
Yeah. So do you give people like a baseline kind of test of any kind?
Not usually, although it depends on the client and what their goals are. If I had a magic wand, I mean, everyone would have an opportunity to go through some HRV baselining upfront,
Yeah.
heart rate variability, so that we could get a sense of the health and flexibility of your autonomic nervous system. And then we could really get a sense of how, as you're building those foundational skills around breathing, around paying attention on purpose, shifting the relationship to the words and the images that you have in between your ears, how is that actually impacting your nervous system? And so we could do a pre and a post and look at that as we go through the skills.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand, and so I'm not quite there yet. But I think that this goes back to the original question, which is really how do we measure success? And for me, that would be one of the ways I would want to on a more regular basis. And
Yeah.
it's only going to get easier and easier. Everybody's got, most people have heart rate measuring devices on their wrists now, or at least have access to a heart rate strap. And so we're getting there. We're getting closer.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Now, I'm going to come back to mental skills, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper because that's the heart of this show anyway. But I do want to rewind for a bit and get a sense of a little bit of your career arc, because you didn't just suddenly show up on this earth as the director of education for O2X. You've had a really rich experience as a performer and certainly as a human being. And so to get a little bit of access to that, I'm curious, if we were writing your performance story and we were going to title some of the key chapters or the key sections, what would those look like?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's a big question. I think it's ever evolving, honestly. I think it's pretty interesting. And when I go back and look, kind of growing up as kind of a weekend warrior skier, and as just an athlete, always an athlete, and always trying to kind of get an edge, not out of competition really, but out of sort of always wanting to better myself. Um, I think it's learning. I think learning is like chapter one, and kind of figuring out who my mentors were, and really learning from other people and observing other people was a huge part. And so really from probably the age of like 5 through, continuously, but through like 12 or 15 was just like taking on as much as I could from all the people in skiing who I looked up to, and watching their pre-race routines, and watching how they did visualization, and how they broke down film, and how they broke down um, all these different parts of their performance, and internalizing that. So I think part two is like internalizing. So it's learning, internalizing, and then um, kind of using them all through my own ski career. So internalizing, and figuring out exactly the same way we're trying to get people to try new things. It's like I had pre-race routines that varied, every week, until I found the one that either I got lucky at a race and I was like, this is my routine and this is what I'm sticking with and I feel good about it, or for whatever reason I felt like I was finally in that zone of performance. I was like, all right, whatever I did there, I'm gonna write it down and stick with it. And then I think there's like the post ski career. So I retired from competitive skiing when I was about 20 years old. So after, a 12 year career, when you retire at 20, you really try to figure out what you're going to do with your life.
Wow, yeah.
And that's where I was like, okay, now that I have all these skills, what do I do with them? And so I think from here on out, it's translation. So learning, internalizing, and translating them. And I realized that I had all these routines and all these different practices and nowhere to really implement them in a performance space. But now I'm like, okay, if I knew that when I walked out my door and I wanted to have all my ski equipment, I had a routine of something that I ran through in my head, I should probably have the same thing when I walk out my door so I don't leave my keys at home and so that I can focus on my work. And so it's really been interesting to be able to translate all those skills into just really everyday life and then hopefully pass them on to other people. I think that's always the goal. Is I was fortunate enough to learn all these skills, and it to me it was all through other people teaching them to me. So I find and I'm really passionate about sharing them with other people. And whether they're a youth athlete or someone who's coming up on retirement in their 60s from being in the fire service for 30 years, like there's always a time to learn these skills so that you can better yourself.
I just, you know what? It's a full stop here because you just took that and instead of getting into sort of the granular, we're talking the narrative and here's the sport I was doing and then here's the next sport I was doing, uh, you went for the big meta thinking, right? So the learning, the internalizing, the translating, then the sharing, and how that I'm sure has covered the big arc, but then certainly is in those little microcycles as well as you pick up a new skill or translate an old, well-learned skill into a new environment and then continue to pass that on. So it's just the type of geeky thinking that I'm here for.
No, that's perfect. And I think it's hard to get granular about it, honestly, because I think what worked, as a ski athlete, there was a ton of visualization, like down to, I spent a year and a half trying to move my right arm like an inch. And so you can get super granular about it, but when I think of how that shapes what I do now, it's not necessarily the exact same skill, but it's that application side. So being able to focus on those really minute changes, or it's just translated in such a different way. And so I think that's why I tend to go big pretty fast in the thinking of it, because I think there's so many different applications for these like tiny, tiny skills.
I need to walk this back for a second though. So you said a year or a year and a half working on moving your right hand just an inch. Is there context to that?
Sure, yeah. So the sport was freestyle skiing. So for anyone who doesn't know exactly what that is, it's moguls and aerials. So it's part judge sport, so it's like part figure skating. So you're judged on your form and your kind of grace going down the hill, more or less, and then the degree of difficulty of the tricks that you're able to do, and then part speed, so part downhill racing. Um, with that, because it's so subjective, everyone kind of has a personal style, and you're judged on, if your knees are coming apart at all during the run, or if you've got a right arm that every time you make a pole plan is flying behind you. You get docked on points because it's not the most graceful looking. And so a lot of, as after you learn the fundamentals, a lot of what you're doing is really just fine tuning these tiny, tiny things that only judges are picking up on. So if, anyone were to watch a race and they'd see 50 people go down the hill relatively in the same manner, and a little different than any speed sport where it's truly just, it's just your time that matters. You're catering to someone else's judgment of how you're doing, which is a whole nother mental performance component in and of itself, of just, there's a lot out of your control. And so when you have such a small thing that you're trying to fix, that's what's in your control. It's like, the judges like it or not, I can't say, but I know I think it looks better when my hands are in this position, and so this is what I'm going to do, um, and this is hopefully rewarded by someone else who's judging it externally.
That's a whole other long conversation. I worked with gymnasts right out of the
Yeah,
gate when I was just getting started, and you just always hope that the judges have good taste, right? And it's certainly out of your control. And so the ability then to use something like imagery and visualization to focus on the aesthetic or the stylistic side of things, in addition to getting down the hill the fastest, is a really interesting application. I think a really valuable one as well. I watched a couple of clips of freestyle skiing to get warmed up for this conversation. Uh, and my knees ached just watching the
Yeah.
moguls, and then my stomach turned just a little bit as you watch them go flipping through the air. It's an incredible sport.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I think that's part of it's just learning it so young that you condition yourself to not be quite as afraid of what you're doing or not know any better, I guess.
Mm-hmm. There, yeah, the it doesn't feel quite as intense because you have the skill to meet the challenge.
Exactly.
Right? You don't just go send a professional run the very first time you did it when you were 8. That's not how that worked.
No, that's probably what I thought it was, but definitely wasn't.
Ha! Oh my goodness. And so visualization was a big piece of the puzzle early.
Very early, yeah.
Do you still use visualization a lot?
I do, and it's in similar applications, it's really performance based for me. So if I'm about to give a presentation or even small things like conversations like this, I think it's really like, the science side is like building those neural pathways of like, all right, if this happens, how am I going to react to, so if it's a difficult conversation or which this is not obviously, but if it is
Well,
like,
not yet.
that's,
Not
I
yet.
know we haven't gotten there yet. But if, anything where I'm presenting or perform, I think of it as like performance or anything like that. I think it never hurts to visualize yourself doing something as well as you want to do it. And I think and then working through those contingencies. And that's what we teach a lot with the tactical athlete side too, is just not everything's going to be perfect. Even if you visualize it that way, you always have to be prepared and know if this happens, how am I going to work through it? Not just full stop, something bad could happen, but how are you going to prepare yourself to get through that, and what does that look like on the other side? So I still use it probably every day. I would say I visualize something, whether it's
Mm.
small or big. But
I remember reading Thinking Fast and Slow and realizing how much of preparation and that style of imagery really play into the ability to think slow in preparation so that you can think fast and effective when it's time to actually have the shit hit the fan. And so that you have those contingencies outlined, you know how you want to react to the likely or maybe unlikely possibilities so that you're not caught unawares.
yep,
And being able to do that on a regular basis creates those neural pathways so that there isn't that little microsecond hitch between stimulus and now, oh, what do I do? And then response. When we think about the evolution of your experience, right? And you just talked about how visualization has evolved. What else do you see in terms of mental skills that you maybe weren't using in your first performance career that have now grown in importance, or maybe you've just doubled down on your strengths and really zoomed in on those? I'm not sure, but I'm curious to see how you've evolved.
oh, that's a good question. I think something that I've had to really learn post ski career is exactly actually how you open this. Is like measuring success, and I think the performance side of that and kind of, I think routines are vastly important for me still, and having a pre-race routine and a pre-performance routine to get yourself into the right kind of zone of performance was critical. And I think that's something I still very much use, but on the back end, like measuring success has really been something I've had to work on. And as an athlete, in terms of, coming, like, mistake management was always really big in skiing because, like, it's a judge sport. So if you bobble or make a tiny mistake, you really have to get yourself over that pretty quickly because there's just you're doing too many runs too fast to have to really like perseverate on it and dwell on that. But I think now post ski career, really figuring out like, okay, if I'm not going up to do 10 training runs and that was my successful day on a ski hill, was did I do that trick 10 times or not? It's really been kind of deep diving of like, what does success look like and how do I measure these skills that I'm using, and how do I make sure that I'm learning a new skill all the time? And I think that's motivation, I guess, is what like it really comes down to, is like the idea of how do you motivate yourself when what used to be your top motivation is no longer there. So that's kind of a roundabout answer for you.
I'll take straight on, roundabout answers, walkabouts. I'm here for all of it.
Perfect.
My follow-up question is, how do you define success now?
Uh, you know, I think for me, it's really like on brand again. It's like, what did I do 1% better today? And I think it really, you have to look at your days like that, and you have to say, because not everything's going to be, you're not always going to have a great day, but if you come out at the end of the day and say, hey, might not have had the best workout today, but I really like nailed this presentation at work, or I really had a great phone call with an old friend, and that was my 1% today. It was just getting in touch with someone. I think kind of finding those like small victories and those things that sort of build you up every day is a measurement. I think it's the other big thing is perspective. So did I have something today that either I changed my perspective on or I was open to a new experience? I think that's a huge part of daily success for me. And two would be, did I help someone else see something in a different way? And was there a point in my day where was able to have a conversation where someone else might change the way that they look at the world or the way that they perceive themselves or try something new in their day? I think that to me is a major mark of success, because it's less. I think we can all be better individually, but how are you helping other people do that? So that's a big one for me.
What's really joyful for me is hearing themes and then having them show up explicitly throughout these conversations. And so learning for learning's sake came up when we were talking about your performance journey. And then learning for the striving and the leveling up and the achieving showed up as well. And then the gift of sharing what you've learned with others was another huge theme. And so they're now you're very on brand, not just with O2X, but also with yourself, which is exciting. I'm also wondering if Adam and Paul and the guys at HQ are like going to give you $1 every time you say 1% better, because we could just keep squeezing it in here.
A lot. It's so true, though. I mean, it's one of those things that before I worked at O2X, that you think of things in that way, but that's not really how I'd frame it. And then you see it in action, and you're like, oh no, it it works. It's true. But yeah, no, I think the themes are definitely there, and I think honestly that's like through a lot of work, and I think transitioning out of a sport forces you, or transitioning out of anything that you've done for, at the time when I was leaving skiing, it was over half of my life. I really got hit with some pretty heavy questions as a 20-year-old, like what's important to me if I'm no longer have an identity as a skier? What can I find joy in, and how do I really look at the world? And so that's a lot of those themes have come through because of really taking some deep dives of like, all right, I need to figure out, if I'm no longer Allie the skier, like what motivates me, what drives me, what really was about skiing that I loved. And so that's a lot of those themes have come through from that work.
And that's not always, and in fact, it's definitely not always comfortable to have to ask those questions, particularly when you're 20. And maybe every 20-year-old should have to answer those questions. But we actually had Kirsten Cooper on earlier in another episode, a former professional downhill skier, and she's now building a platform for athlete retirement, and was really speaking directly to that feeling of doing something at a really high level so early in your life, and then going like, my 12-year career is over at 20.
Yeah,
Now what?
it's a challenge.
It's the challenge and the opportunity. You've been able to understand yourself in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise. And I know a lot of 20-year-olds who didn't ask those questions and maybe are still looking for those answers, not knowing it. But it didn't come without effort and discomfort, I imagine.
Oh yeah. I asked those questions when I was 20. I don't think I answered them until I was probably about 32.
Well, and the good news is we always just keep asking, right? There's the answer for now, but there's not the answer forever.
Exactly.
There was one piece that I want to pick on just a second, not pick on, right? But pull out that you pointed towards the 1% better sometimes being something like I connected with a friend. And I think that when talking about defining success, it's really easy to think of success as more money, further up the podium, more weight on the bar today than yesterday, and those concrete ways of defining progress towards a goal. I'm closer to the top of the mountain. And it's useful to recognize that, first of all of this is made up anyway, right? It's all invented in terms of what's valuable. And so if we get to start from scratch, that we could also define success as having just been really connected with someone or taken the opportunity to help shift somebody's perspective or sit with them while they're in their own suck, right? They're having a terrible day and I didn't fix it, but I at least was there with them and so they weren't alone, which aren't things that are going to show up on the box score unless I decide to create my own scorecard.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a big part of it is you have to do the work and figure out what drives you. Um, and again, I mean, I think it all goes back to that, like we're all only as good as we are individually, but you really like you need the people around you, and I think being a part of that world and helping you help one person get a little better, they're gonna pay it forward and help another person get a little better. And I would only the only reason I was able to accomplish anything in skiing is because of coaches that I had and because of mentors and teachers, and they did that for me. And I think that's like such a huge piece of it is what are you doing to help like, foster that and help other people in whatever arena or area or whatever they're trying to do. Um, Not only perform better, but I think live better and be happier
Mm.
is a big. I think that goes into performance for sure, but that's it for me.
One, it's really, I'm never very sneaky about it. When I tell folks up front, when I start working with them, I mean, I want you to be a happy, healthy performer because happy, healthy performers are better at performing. And
Yeah,
also, at some point, whatever your performance is, you're not going to be doing it anymore. And if you're not doing it anymore, I want you to be able to transition into the next thing, take the skills with you, uh, and live a life of meaning and joy that's not contingent on having put a ball in a net or fill in the blank, right? Crossing the finish line, doing really
right.
cool tricks and aerials off the ski jump, all of that. And so it's really exciting to hear your own journey having mirrored some of that, but then also, again, the key theme of being able to pass it on and really help people absorb that lesson a little bit faster. I also love how you've turned it around and asked me questions.
Yeah, well, always. This is it's I could I mean, I think yeah, it's all about learning. Everyone's got different perspectives, and I know you bring a lot to. I still use your good, better, how method of going through performance. So
It might be useful. I was actually curious when we're thinking about reflection because it's come up a couple of times now. What does reflection look like for you, whether it's a daily practice or on that broader arc?
in terms of like performance reflection or just
I'm
general.
I'm gonna leave it wide
Oh
open for you. You take it
gosh.
every direction that you want.
Oh man. I'm in like a constant state of reflection, I think. Because I think there's you I think there's definitely a line. You can't always be looking at what happened before. You have to kind of draw the line in the sand of, okay, this happened and how am I going to move on from it? But I think that idea of leaving with a plan is the key of reflection. So you have to, we talk about this, whether it's like a debrief or like in the military terms, like after action reviews, things like that. It's like if you're going to reflect on something that's happened to you, it can be a dangerous path if you don't have a stop point to it and a leave with a plan. So I think, you can just always think of like, well, if this had happened, I would have done this, or I should have done this, or there's kind of dangerous ways to reflect. And then I think for me, it's always about, okay, what happened, what went wrong, what went right, but what am I going to do about it now? And what lessons can I take from that and move forward, whether it's in the same category or, can I use something that I learned from one experience to foster positive growth in another experience? I think the importance there is like the so what of, this happened, this is how I handled it, good, bad, or ugly. This is what I'm going to do about it, and this is how I'm either going to recreate that in the future or go a different direction. So I think that so what question is pretty key in the reflective piece for me, and I think that's really really hard. Like I think we're human beings, so we tend to think back about things, and it's really hard to just be like, okay, no more thinking about that. What are we going to do about it? I think that's the challenge and the skill.
Interesting. I've never thought about reflection as being dangerous. And I think it immediately connected for me because I'm a big fan of boundaries. Like either physical thresholds or mental thresholds that say, before this thing, this is what I'm doing. And now after this, we've moved on. And one of the powers of reflection for me when it's systematic is regardless of what I'm reflecting on, whether it's performance or it's, I'm training for something, being able to say I've done what I need to do in terms of learning a lesson. I could continue to ruminate. And maybe that's the distinction is rumination versus reflection. I could continue to go
Yeah.
back and relitigate in my mind. I could have said this thing in between songs during open mic night. And instead I said that, and that was not funny, and everybody didn't laugh, and now that's and over and over and over again, which is a ton of wasted energy. And so finding a way to create that threshold where I've done the reflection, I know what I can do different next time. I have a plan. I've left with a plan. And now I have permission to let it go. And I've done it in a way that's very clear so that voice in the back of my head that's screaming, you need to think more about this or else something terrible is going to happen next time. You can like wave to that voice and smile and say, hey, thanks for being there. I appreciate you trying to help, but I already did the work. And now it's time for me to just like go enjoy time with my family or friends. That's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. I think you're right though. Maybe it's rumination is that's the dangerous side of it is when you're just kind of thinking about it and not not making any plans to move forward with it.
Well, because we swirl on the things that didn't go well instead of focusing on what's usually the 96 or 97% of what did go well. And the more you pay attention to something, the bigger it gets. And so now all of a sudden you walk away and by the end of the night, you're laying in bed, you haven't done your low and slow breathing. So now it's 1 a.m. I'm speaking from personal experience. And what could have been a pretty good experience, a pretty good workshop or something of that nature. Now all of a sudden it was terrible in my mind. Right? I'm terrible and the next one's going to be terrible too. And there's absolutely no value to that.
Yeah.
And so when I'm thinking about reflection or after action review, it's really about creating the structure so that I can get what I need out of it. And then that's it. I can move on. Because
Yeah.
otherwise my mind left to its own devices is not always my friend. Is that different though from sort of the non-performance based reflection?
I think probably yes and no, right? I think there's always something to learn. I think that's the key of any type of reflection. And maybe if you're reflecting on something that's not a performance-based reflection, you're just kind of thinking back on an experience that you had and reflecting on that. I think there's still some piece of it that's like there's some reason that you reflect on certain things or the certain memories like continue to come back into your mind, whether it's a super positive experience or a less positive one. There's always something about that. Like there's certain things that you're just like vivid memories or reflections of certain things. And I think it's because those are the moments that you learn to either something about yourself or something about the world around you. There's always some kind of learning that comes from reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't know. It's a very good question because that's it's hard to, it's honestly, it's once, I think once you look at reflection from a systematic way, it's hard not to.
Mm-hmm.
So even from some of those things that I probably would reflect on normally, once you have it in your head to do in a systematic way, it's hard for me to make the distinction.
The neural pathways are
That
grooved
it's
deep for you.
just, yeah, they're done.
I want to highlight that question that you so elegantly slid into that answer around so what? That, and it really speaks to me that we can continue to optimize without considering what the target is. Right? We can get closer to the bullseye, but we may not have ever considered what the bullseye is, or maybe we thought about it when we were 8, but have not updated our target since then. And so that, for me, coming back to that, how do we define success? There's the small wins, there's the process-oriented ideas. And then I think it's really critical that we come back and always are asking that question, so what? In service of, fill in the blank. Because if I'm not asking that question, I might find that I've very efficiently and very effectively gotten someplace I didn't want to go. We're going to start to wrap up because I want to be mindful of your time. And so if there was a practice or a little experiment, because we've covered a lot of ground today, if there was a practice or an experiment that you could recommend to me so that I could try on, test out, or better understand myself from a mental perspective, what might that look like? Coach me up, Allie. Let's do this.
I think for me, something, outside of the kind of the tangible skills like breathing or visualization or things like that, I think better understanding really comes from the activity of figuring out we call it kind of like B's and do's, but really coming up with, like, if you were to sit down and write your legacy 20 years from now, what does that look like? Not from your achievements, not from your successes, maybe from your successes, but not strictly from, like, I won this award or you know accomplished X, Y, or Z, but really, like, fundamentally, what would you want that to be in terms of how you, like, how are you as a person, not just what you're doing, but how are you day to day. And I think really digging deep into that with people and figuring out, okay, if you want to be known as someone who always says yes they if a friend approaches you to, like, go on a hike or go on a bike ride or do something out of your comfort zone, that's your B. Like, I want to be that person. And then breaking it down to, okay, what are you going to do today that if you went to bed at tonight and said, did I live into that legacy? Did I live into being that person? Did I do something that got me, that would help me get there? So I think for me, it's helping you kind of figure out, and helping athletes and tactical athletes kind of figure out, what, like, who am I? Like, what do I want to be known for? But then what am I going to do about it? I think that would be like the foundation and the fundamental starting point.
It's so stinking systematic, right? Like, as I'm thinking about the follow-up question, and I'd like to point out, I could have been mindful and present and not thinking about what I was going to ask next. And you followed up what's your legacy? And then you shifted from not just what do you want to achieve? What's a resume legacy going to look like? And instead shifted more to the relational. How do you want to be in relationship to the people that are most important to you along that journey over the next 20 years, 40 years, fill in the blank? You followed it up, though, then with, what is that? If that's your B, that's how I want to be in this world. Then let's systematically work that backwards to, what are the actions you're going to take, and not just take in an ambiguous timeline, but what are you going to do today to be that person today?
Yep.
And this really pushes on an illusion that I think we hold on to because it feels more comfortable, which is, I'm going to be that person one day. When if I decided that I was going to take action today to be more like the person I want to be in 20 years, I might find that I'm actually not quite that far away from actually living that experience of being that person, which is exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
Exactly.
How does this ripple out? So if I do this exercise today, I sit down, I think about my legacy, I isolate a few ways of being, and then I think about what I can do differently today in order to live into those, what might change? If I was then going to look at my scorecard and design a scorecard to measure that well, what might I be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it empowers people to take a lot more control of what is seemingly uncontrollable. So, whether it's job demands or, you know, performance demands or whatever those things are that are seemingly there's some things that are out of your control. It really empowers you to figure out what are you in control of. So I think at the end of the day, if you're able to write down in your journal, or you have your performance kind of notebook there, it's like, what did I do today to live into my legacy? And I think that really, like, there's something so powerful about having that tangible recognition of, like, yeah, like I'm proud to have accomplished, you know, whatever that may be. Like, I did a great workout. Like, that's something I took control of in my day, and feel like I kind of took the time for me to live into what I want to be. And so I think part of it's, what were you, how in control, or what were you able to control out of your day, that sometimes feels uncontrollable. And I think it gives you a sense of purpose in a big way. So kind of measuring, hey, did I feel like I had a sense of purpose today, or not? Um, and I think that's a powerful question that we don't always ask ourselves, but it's a pretty small, well, it's a big question, but it's, can do it on a scale of 1 to 5. And it's just, every day adding those little things that you do up to say, hey, did I hit that target, or how far off was I, and why was I off? Because there's going to be days where you're like, man, I handled this situation like so far out of the way that I wanted to be, and what I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
do with it. There's going to be days, but maybe you did something else that allowed you to live into a different part of where you want to be, and what you want that legacy to be. So I think a lot of it is just I think it empowers people to really take control of what they're doing every day. And like you said, like, we think of goals and we think of these really, like, lofty long-term achievement and successful, like, we live in this society that's just like driven by like long-term success, and whether it's financial or like jobs or performance outcomes, like, we're always driven by something else. And it really allows you to take control of, like, I can dictate what a successful day looks like to me because of where my values are. And I know what I value, and I know maybe it's like showing up on time to an event, because I really value, like, that's a strong value for me, is just being like, having integrity with my timing. And so if I know that I can show up on time to everything I do today, like, that's a big win. Um, and if I can't, then maybe why not? Like, what got in my way today that might impact that for tomorrow. Um,
It,
so
it it always comes back to leave with a plan.
it does.
And in between, there's really this alignment. It's a conversation about alignment, right? To get a sense of the legacy or the vision, the who you want to be. And then rather than leaving it there, because if I reflected on, am I living my legacy today without having taken it any deeper, that's going to be a really tough question for me to reflect on. And I probably will only do it once and then never come back to it. And instead,
Yeah.
you've pushed me, and hopefully pushed the listeners, to consider, what do the actions that speak to that being look like? And then I can measure those. I can measure the number of times I took an action. Did I work out today or did I not? And if my physical health is important, right, that's a really clear, did I do in order to be?
Yeah.
One for me that I try and focus on, that's very non-performance related, is whether or not I reached out to someone that's important to me, and try and do it each day, and just offer up a little bit of gratitude.
It's a great one.
Because on my worst day, I can still be grateful for the help that I've received or the people that I'm connected to. And if instead I think about being a person who's grateful and a good friend, good sibling, all of that, well, I don't have a measurement for that. How good was I? I don't know. But if I look at, was there a discrete action that I could take, choose that action, and then measure myself to that, suddenly I can really reveal whether or not I'm living the way I want to, or if I need to shift so that I can be more in alignment. Which
Exactly.
I just love that you're able to take what could be these really highfalutin sort of esoteric ideas and then immediately tether them to, like, did I breathe today or not on purpose, right? Did I care for somebody else today or not on purpose? So to bring us home, I'm always curious about the beautiful moment. I think all of us, whether we're athletes or otherwise, are drawn to some performance domain and the beautiful moment that happens in that context. And so you get to pick the performance domain, right? But I'd like you to paint a picture of a beautiful moment and then tell me why it's beautiful to you.
Ooh, this is a big question. There's a few. I have a few that definitely come up, but I think probably one that will always always stick in my head is my the ski run that I made the U.S. ski team with. And it's honestly it's actually not for the achievement that it was. And you'll probably laugh because this goes right in line with everything else. But the reason it was such an amazing moment, a beautiful moment, was that it was supposed to be my last ski race ever. And I was just going to say goodbye to all my friends. I was supposed to start college, and that was going to be my last hurrah. And I had a ski coach named Brian who was just like so dedicated and would just, he knew it was, I think he knew I was going to do better than I thought I was going to. But he also knew I thought it was going to be my last race. And so he made it like the most fun just weekend ever. And he would ski down the side of the course my whole run, like every run I took, just screaming words of encouragement and probably some other words too. But I only chose to hear the words of encouragement and just was so excited for me and to be there. Um, and just to kind of have that culmination. And I remember skiing through the finish line, and he came and like tackled me in the finish area out of excitement because I think he knew that I'd won the race, and I was like oblivious and had no idea. I knew I'd skied well, but he knew, and he was so excited. And it was one of those moments where I like got to call my brother, who was my like the reason that I started skiing to begin with, and tell him that I had made the ski team, and call my parents and tell them after their like years and years of dedication to this sport that they thought I was crazy for doing, and all they wanted was for me to like keep my teeth and my knees intact. And that for me is like such an amazing and you know, using your words, a beautiful moment, because it was just one of the most fun ever. And it was a real realization that like if you're having fun and you're happy and you're just going with the flow and doing kind of executing on what you know you can do, you can achieve a lot more than if you're not. And also just to be able to be there with some people that I had known for so long and had put it equally dedicated to my own success, was probably, I think, one of the most powerful things that could ever happen.
Wow. I'm just consistently humbled hearing stories like that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
I've got one question left.
hit me.
Where can people find out more about you, or follow you on the socials, or you tell us so that I can put it in the show notes and then people can go say hi.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, probably the best place is through O2X. So Instagram, O2X Human Performance. Our website is O2X.com. I'm on there. You can email me, you can message me, you can do whatever you need to. But that's probably the best way to reach me. And yeah, and then I can throw you any other information. But that's you'll find me and a few other people on there.
People are going to be reaching out so that you can help design their scorecards so that they can do a better job of measuring their own success.
I love it. I will have that conversation any day. I think that's what it's all about.
Oh, Allie, this has been so much fun. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being so generous with your passion and the knowledge that you can share. It's been a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed yourself too.
But yeah, this is the best. I will talk mental performance all day, every day with anyone who wants to have the conversation. So thank you. It's been great to do.
All right, that's it for today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe to the show and don't forget to rate and leave a review. If you want to dive deeper into the concepts and concrete practices from today, I'm talking access to show notes and the transcript for the episode and a whole bunch of other mental training goodies, head over to mtl.academy. That's mtl.academy. Each week after the episode goes live, I'll also be sharing a worksheet that's going to help you level up your mindset and mental skills, and the only way to get access is through our weekly newsletter. So when you hit the bottom of the webpage, don't forget to sign up for that too. Until next time, be well.